Happy Easter, everyone. In the Christian Holy Calendar, we celebrate today the story of hope in the face of oppression. Jesus, a spiritual leader and reformer, birthed a religious movement that would change the world. But today, we celebrate his life and his victory over greed, victory over indifference, victory over abuse of power, and that saving message that defines spiritual life. Care for the sick, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, house the homeless, visit those in prison. We begin our service today with the Easter story itself retold by the great religious educator, now retired, Gail Forsyth Vale. Until recently, she finished her career leading the faith development office of our entire denomination. Long ago, there lived a Jewish prophet and teacher named Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus traveled from place to place, teaching and offering hope to people who were oppressed by a cruel government. At that time, Palestine was ruled by the Roman Empire. Jesus taught that God loves every single person and that there is a place for everyone in the kingdom of heaven, including those who were hated or ignored by others. Large crowds would gather around to hear Jesus' message of hope, love, and welcome. Pontius Pilate, who we heard about last Sunday, and the other Roman authorities thought he was a dangerous troublemaker. When Jesus decided to go to the big city of Jerusalem to bring his message of universal love, it was a very dangerous thing to do because this was a challenge to those in power. On Thursday night of the week, he entered Jerusalem. He shared a meal with his friends and then went with them to a beautiful garden to pray for strength and courage. The Roman soldiers arrested him there. The next day, he was sentenced to a cruel death by being nailed to a wooden cross, which was the Roman punishment for people they considered troublemakers. On the Friday that he was put to death, his friends all scattered, afraid that the Roman soldiers would hurt them too. After his death, one of his followers took his body and washed it and prepared it for burial. He placed Jesus' body in a tomb, then rolled a heavy stone across the entrance. Jesus' supporters were very sad. Their beloved teacher and messenger of hope was gone from them. They felt frightened and hopeless. What were they to do? On the third day after his death, 3 women went to the place where Jesus was buried, bringing spices to anoint his body. They talked about how hard it would be to roll away the heavy stone in front of the tomb. When they got there, they found the stone already rolled away and Jesus' body gone. The women ran from that place, frightened. Soon after that, Jesus, his friends, and supporters began to talk with one another about the things Jesus had said and taught, about the wonderful way he had given them hope, about the idea that each and every one of us is loved by God. Sometimes when they talked about the things he had said, it seemed like he was right there with them. Some were convinced he was reborn or resurrected. They remembered, and gradually they began to feel hopeful as they remembered the love he taught. Their sadness didn't go away completely, but it faded. As they remembered Jesus, they knew deep in their hearts that love is stronger than cruelty and stronger than death. His spirit lived on. His teachings, his life would change the whole face of the world. Each child that's born is another redeemer. So, this is why we commemorate the life and death of Jesus. There's some things worth living for, there's some things worth dying for, and there are some things worth remembering. Spiritually, we can also look at it as a testament to the audacity of life in the face of power. Christian theologian Dolores Williams, she writes, Jesus did not come to redeem humans by showing them God's love manifested in the death of God's innocent child on a cross erected by cruel, imperialistic, patriarchal power. Rather, the Spirit of God in Jesus came to show humans life, to show redemption through a perfect ministerial vision of righting relations between the body, individual and community, mind, of humans and of tradition, and spirit. I feel this is the spirit of the Christian path that most strongly lives on in our Unitarian and Universalist communities. How do we live a life of meaning amidst all the world's struggle around wealth, authority, and consumption? How do we build up communities when nations sometimes seek to divide and control? Which traditions hold us up and which traditions hold us back? Does a life of spirit have meaning to us any longer? And what does it feel like if it does? The world of the Bible is in some ways very similar to ours. It speaks of a people trying to survive within radically changing times. We are blessed here not to suffer under an imperial power these days, although some of us do suffer under institutional oppression. Many around us know the curse of poverty or the lack of equitable access to opportunities. Religion is changing. Family structures are ever changing. How we view security, safety, and information are all matters in flux. And today, we focus in on the life of a prophet who reminded us there is a right way to live. In fact, as students, we're known as followers of the way. In this path, we're asked not only to love our neighbor as ourselves, not only to forgive 70 times 70, but to lift up the poor, to steer away from worldly power, and yes, again, that some things in life are not only worth dying for, but they're worth living for, too. Life has meaning, life has purpose, life lives audaciously in the face of worldly power. Hosanna, Easter is a day of joyful celebration. Happy Easter, everyone. Our next story is a retelling of the story of Mary Magdalene that was retold by our own Star Austin some years ago. Mary Magdalene is a woman from the Bible. Mary Magdalene loved Jesus. He was her teacher and her friend. She was one of his followers and believed in his message of caring for one another. He taught about compassion and fairness and helping those who were the least in society, those who others might forget or walk past. Mary Magdalene had followed Jesus. He went from place to place, sharing sorry, I lost my spot in the story. Mary Magdalene had followed Jesus. This is an act in the Easter holiday of forgiveness. Thank you. Had followed Jesus as he went from place to place sharing his message. Some say on his journeys, he healed people and even healed Mary Magdalene. Not everyone liked Jesus' message, though, and he was, as we heard earlier, he was sentenced to die. Can you imagine how very sad his followers and his friends must have been? If you've ever lost anyone close to you, then you know that there is an ache in our hearts when we lose someone. Mary Magdalene was so sad, she went to the tomb, the place where they had put the body of Jesus. Now, the way the Bible describes the tomb is like a cave with a big stone blocking the entrance. She went and found the stone had been rolled away. She looked inside, and the tomb was empty. Jesus was not in the tomb. She ran to the other disciples, other followers of Jesus, and cried out for them to come and see. She was distraught. She thought the body had been moved to an unknown place. This probably made her feel sick to her stomach with worry. The story goes that she bent over crying, and when she looked up, she saw two angels who asked her why she was crying. They say Jesus was among them and that Mary Magdalene looked right at Jesus and thought he was a gardener. She didn't recognize him for some reason. He asked her who she was looking for, and she wept and told him she was looking for her teacher. Jesus reveals himself to Mary Magdalene saying, "Do you not know me?" Now imagine the joy and relief she must have felt to see him when not only had she thought he was dead, but then also thought his body missing. She must have felt like a stone had been rolled off of her heart. He told her to go and tell the others, and so she raced to the other disciples to tell them that she had seen their Lord, their teacher, their friend. And they did not believe her. Now let's think about this for a moment. On the one hand, of course they didn't believe her, right? They saw that Jesus had died. How in the world could Mary Magdalene have seen him walking up and walking and talking in the garden? On the other hand, the story tells us they had witnessed many miracles from Jesus already. If they had been witness to Jesus healing others in such powerful ways, why would they doubt this miracle? It wasn't until they saw Jesus themselves that they believed. And even then, Thomas did not believe. He wanted proof that this was the same Lord, the same Jesus that he had known. The story of Easter is a story of joy. It's a story of celebration. It's the resurrection story. Resurrection meaning coming to life after death. Now, today we know that when people died, they will not come back. Some of us here believe this story is a true story. Some of us think the story may have been made up and could never have happened. Either way, the story of Easter is a powerful story. The story of rebirth, of beginning again, the story of joy and community, the story of something so unusual, it's called a miracle. It can give us a story of hope. Be joyful, though you have considered all the facts. Ask the questions that have no answers. As soon as the generals and politicos can predict the motions of your mind, lose it. Practice resurrection. The free and responsible search for truth and meaning is a central pillar to our 7 principles. We'll be hearing more about it at next week's service. But Easter is a time that challenges us to lose our minds, or our thinking minds for a time, to check our brains at the door, not to stop being reasonable or being accepting of anything that anyone tells you is truth, but to put our fretting minds to bed. They're in charge most of the time anyway. Let's not give them a free ticket to running all aspects of our lives. Living in Long Island, there's a high likelihood that you're stressed by the cost of your rent or mortgage, or the weight of your student debt, or the credit card collector's calling, or a long stretch of unemployment these days, or the next regional test to make sure you get into the school you want to get into, or the school your kids want to get into, or the school you want your kids to get into, or your incredible work schedule, or the demands of your vocation. Just saying all these things out loud raises my own anxiety level. These are all rational problems that require rational solutions to them. The technical steps we take to addressing them are matters for the brain. When you walk through our threshold on Zoom these days, our fellowship doors soon, we hope, I want to ask you to let another part of yourself take the reins. We often think of this in terms of the heart. I would go a step further. Let your soul come to the forefront. Let your guard down a little. Let go of your assumptions around the worst of religious life and leave space for the best to grow here. I don't mean to start buying whatever foolish thing someone says, but rather allow who you are to shine without the running internal monologue categorizing everything. We have a million things that need our attention and care in the wider world. And you probably come here to work toward that as well. Ease down the trappings of the head and let your heart give more guidance. Let values of love and care override hate and indifference. Let character lead away from ideology. May relationships overcome opinions. Be joyful, though you have considered all the facts. Ask the questions that have no answers. As soon as the generals and politicos can predict the motions of your mind, lose it. Practice resurrection. And let the whole creation cry. Thank you, Terry. Earlier, we heard an adaptation from the Gospel of John, told and retold from a few perspectives. Personally, I'm most moved by the telling from the perspective of Mary Magdalene. It's speaking directly to this meditation on the stone rolled back. But Mary Magdalene is the first to witness Jesus following the stone rolled back. Yet, she's often overlooked. She's seen as a secondary figure by many and not always in a positive light. And sometimes folks even say things about her that weren't true in the Bible stories. I think most of us go through our lives, at least at some point, where we can relate to that, being overlooked or passed over or criticized for things we haven't done. In fact, it's the very opposite for Mary Magdalene, where we often hear about the apostles who witnessed the risen Jesus. Mary is the first person to witness Jesus on Easter. And he tells her to go and tell the others. Mary, go and tell them. Mary Magdalene, a woman who's far too often mistakenly looked down upon, is the apostle to the apostles. In a way, she's the first Christian, the very first Christian. But we don't always talk about it that way. Some of us need to be reminded that even overlooked, we have worth. Our part in the bigger story matters as much as any other. Our next reading comes from the Reverend Rachel Longberg. This came out this week in the series from the denomination called Braver, Wiser. She begins it with a quote that we just heard a few times from Wendell Berry. Be joyful, though you have considered all the facts. Practice resurrection. She writes, in the church that raised me, there was a woman named Gussie. Gussie was 81 years older than me. I considered her a special friend. Gussie was the kind of person who just about everyone considered a special friend. One of the wonderful things about Gussie was that she dressed for church. She emerged from the struggles of her life with a commitment to beauty and elegance. Her formal suit, hat, and gloves stood out in the congregation. Most people in this suburban Seattle congregation dressed in polar fleece and sensible shoes, as if a hike might break out at any moment. On Easter, Gussie always outdid herself, wearing an Easter bonnet tastefully done up with flowers. Everyone looked forward to seeing the beauty and joy embodied on Easter mornings. Gussie died when she was in her late 90s, after a long, meaningful life and a brief illness. She died in the early spring, a few weeks before Easter. We all mourned. People shared how sad they would be to not see Gussie in her beautiful Easter bonnet that year. It felt like the end of Gussie's story. Then someone had an idea. What if we wore Easter bonnets like Gussie did? The word spread. That Easter morning, the sanctuary was filled with Easter bonnets and other hats on the heads of dozens of people of all genders. It was beautiful. The church has continued that tradition. People wear Easter bonnets and other hats every Sunday, every Easter morning. People who love Gussie, people who never knew Gussie, people who weren't even born before her death have all been invited into Gussie's story. Her commitment to beauty and joy lives on. While this Easter bonnet tradition has faded some over the years, it has continued. This is my favorite resurrection story. People of all ages and genders wearing Easter bonnets year after year in memory of someone that not all of them remember. It's a triumph of love over death, which is the core of the Easter message. Death is never the end of the story. Gussie's story continues on in the hearts and on the heads of the congregation that loved her. Reverend Rachel closes with this short prayer. In this season of struggle, may we find and create beauty and joy. May we know in our bones that death is not the end of the story. May we practice resurrection. Amen. In closing, I find the story of Easter, to be powerful and transformative. I believe it has a depth of meaning that can point us back on the right path when we trip up. There's the challenge of Palm Sunday. There's the challenge of Palm Sunday to remember a time when we have spoken or acted with fanfare for Jesus' message of compassion, forgiveness, and charity. But we forget that when in our daily lives, it's hard to deal with the needs of the world. Jesus comes into Jerusalem to wild accolades, but ends the week on the cross. Where do we pay lip service to our ideals, and where do we fall short? In a world where a lot of people allow greed to win over compassion, It's life-saving to have a message that teaches otherwise. Oppression, discrimination, bigotry are always on the wrong side of history. They are always on the wrong side of history. And although some people will try to tell you otherwise, that is always on the wrong side of the gospel message. Oppression, discrimination, bigotry is always on the wrong side of the gospel message. But Easter is not solely the social justice message. It's not solely the spiritual message of salvation and grace. Easter is also a story that lays the bedrock for community. Communities are built upon lessons of compassion and concern, of memory and hope. Communities are well founded when power and privilege don't become the rule of law, and the virtue of forgiveness is critical if we ever hope to enter back into community after another wrong is committed. Easter is also a story of adversity. Adversity can lead to hardship and despair, or it can lead to a new creation. The story of Jesus reminds us that we may not have the choice to wish away adversity, but we do have the choice to make something new from it, a new hope. Religions make central these teachings because these truths are central to life. They must be told again and again. Happy Easter. May this day remind us of the commitments we have faithfully made and help bring about a world that is worthy of the trust we have been given.